In this mini lesson, we'll discuss the three main forms of wills, which are conventional wills, notarial wills, and holograph wills. We'll start with conventional wills. A conventional will, also called a formal will, is probably what most students are familiar with. It's a legal document that's usually written up with the help of a lawyer. In Quebec, it's referred to as a will before witnesses, which is a pretty darn good description of exactly what it is. While it's not a legal requirement that a conventional will be written up with the help of a lawyer, it's a good idea to do so to ensure the proper wording is used, that it meets appropriate formalities, etc. On the other hand, a pre-printed fill-in-the-blank type will can also be considered a valid conventional will, providing it respects the formal requirements. These wills use boilerplate or standardized language which may not depict the true intentions of the testator and should therefore only be used when a more formal type of will isn't possible. And these wills are not appropriate for complex estates. Before we move on to holograph wills, let me quickly discuss notarial wills, which are used in Quebec. A notarial will is one that's prepared and executed by a notary. They're considered notarial deeds, and because they're created by a notary, there's no requirement to validate them after death, which means they aren't subject to probate. For the purposes of this course, that's really all you need to know about them. Now let's take a look at holograph wills. We're going to walk through an example, but because we're talking about a pretty somber topic, we're going to use cartoon characters instead of real people. Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner, who as everybody knows are arch enemies, recently buried the hatchet and became friends, or so the Roadrunner thought. Wile E. invited Roadrunner to go boating and successfully executed his most dastardly plan by leaving him stranded on a deserted island. Wile E. knew that the island was infested with dangerous wolves that came out after dark, and that Roadrunner probably wouldn't survive the night. Sensing his impending doom, Roadrunner wrote a will in his own handwriting, dated it and signed it, stuck it in a bottle, and tossed it out to sea. The bottle was found by a fisherman a few days later, as were Roadrunner's remains. Now, this silly story depicts why holograph wills are important. Take note of the following points about holograph wills. A conventional will is ideal, but a holograph will may be appropriate in circumstances where it's not possible to write such a will. For example, if the testator is all alone with no witnesses present. A holograph will must be in the testator's own handwriting, and I stress handwriting, not a typewriter or computer printout. An expert can testify on the authenticity of a handwritten document by comparing it to samples of the person's other writings, but this is not possible with a typed document. There is no need to have witnesses sign the document, as holograph wills are typically written in situations where witnesses are not present. No other writing other than the testator's writing can appear on the holograph will. The testator must sign the holograph will, and holograph wills are not valid in Prince Edward Island, so it's a good thing Roadrunner wasn't from PEI. After drafting a will, a testator may be reluctant to go through the trouble and cost of drafting an all-new will if he or she wants to make a few changes. Fortunately, minor updates can be made by way of a legal document called a codicil. When drafting a codicil, you have to be careful because it could potentially invalidate the existing will, as the existing will would no longer be considered the testator's final instructions. Therefore, specific wording should be used in the codicil to confirm the continued validity of the existing will and that the codicil is only an amendment. Now, they really only should be used for relatively minor changes. If there are numerous changes or the changes are complex, it's better to just draft a new will. Finally, a codicil can take any form, and it doesn't necessarily have to be in the same form as the original will that it's updating. For example, a formal will can be amended by a holograph codicil. In some provinces, such as Ontario and British Columbia, you can actually have multiple wills. Having more than one will may make sense if you want to deal with different groups of assets completely separately. This approach could be effective if, say, the testator holds assets in several countries, and doing so could potentially provide tax savings and reduce probate fees. But I should stress, drafting multiple wills is complex and should only be done by a trust and estates lawyer who has the requisite experience. Here at SeeWhy Learning, we've supported literally tens of thousands of students as they get prepared for their financial services exams. So trust me when I tell you that obscure terms make for great multiple choice questions, because it's pretty easy to come up with 3 really tempting, plausible, but wrong answers. So that brings us to gifts or donation mortis causa, which translates to deathbed gifts. For example, if a father on his deathbed gifts his son his fully restored vintage Corvette, it would be considered a gift mortis causa. The doctrine of gifts mortis causa can also be used to give money to a qualified charity. To be valid though, the gift must be made in contemplation of death, must be delivered to the beneficiary without any encumbrance. In other words, nothing's owed on it and there's no requirement to pay for it. And finally, it can only be completed upon the death of the donor. In other words, if the donor survives, the transfer can't take place.